Rich man throws 4-year-old beggar girl down a bottomless well, but the horse saw it and does something that shocks everyone. Comment what you think will happen. Your opinion is very important. And subscribe to my channel to support my work. Your help is very important. The sun had barely peeked over the horizon when Izzy woke up on a park bench in the middle of Harmony Creek, shivering in the floral dress that hadn't kept her warm for days. The 4-year-old rubbed her swollen eyes, feeling her stomach rumble with a hunger that seemed to grow every morning. It had been 2 weeks since her grandma Betty had passed away, leaving her completely alone in the world. The little girl rose unsteadily, her weak legs barely able to support her. Her bare feet were bruised by the gravel of the streets, and her brown hair, once always carefully brushed by her grandmother, now formed a dirty tangle that covered part of her thin face. The brown eyes, which once sparkled with childish joy, now carried a deep sadness that shouldn't exist in such a small child. Izzy began her daily walk through the deserted streets of the small town, looking for scraps of food in the trash cans or the kindness of someone who might give her a piece of bread. Her small hands delicately rummaged through the garbage bags, always careful not to make noise and attract unnecessary attention. The smell of spoiled food, mixed with the heat that was beginning to build, made her stomach churn. But she needed to find something, anything. People in the town passed by her as if she were invisible. Some looked away with pity, others with indifference. Mrs. Peterson from the bakery sometimes gave her a day-old roll, but not always. Mr. Johnson from the diner once offered her a glass of water, but then grumbled that he couldn't afford to feed abandoned children. Izzy quickly learned that she couldn't count on anyone but herself. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the heat became unbearable. Izzy sought shade under the awning of the drugstore, where she watched children her age playing with their mothers in the park. A strange pain squeezed her chest when she saw those scenes of affection and protection that she herself had lost forever. Her memories of her grandmother were fragmented, the smell of herbal soap, the lullabies whispered at night, the warm lap where she used to fall asleep. The afternoon brought a discovery. Walking along the dirt road that led to the farms on the outskirts of town, Izzy spotted a huge property with a large white-painted house and manicured gardens. It was different from anything she knew. It seemed straight out of the fairy tales that her grandmother used to tell. Hunger and exhaustion made her think that maybe she would find shelter there, or at least someone kind who would give her some food. She approached slowly, hiding behind the trees that surrounded the property. The gate was tall and imposing, but there was an opening in the side fence through which she managed to pass. Her bare feet stepped on the soft grass for the first time in weeks, a strange and comforting sensation. The garden was full of colorful flowers and fruit trees that made her mouth water. Then she heard voices coming from the back of the house. Curious and hoping to find someone who could help her, Izzy approached on tiptoe, being careful not to make noise. She hid behind a large oak tree and peeked through the branches, trying to see who was talking. What she saw paralyzed her with terror. A tall man, with grey hair and expensive clothes, was digging a hole in the backyard. Next to him were several black plastic bags, full of papers that he buried quickly and nervously. Sweat ran down the man's face, who constantly looked around, as if he feared being discovered. Izzy didn't understand what was happening, but something inside her told her that this scene was not normal. The man finished burying the bags and began to cover the hole with dirt, stomping on the spot to disguise it. It was at that moment that a dry twig snapped under Izzy's small feet. The noise echoed in the afternoon silence like a gunshot, and the man's eyes turned directly to where she was hiding. The girl's blood ran cold when she realized she had been discovered. Richard Huntington, 62 years old, owner of the largest cattle ranch in the region, felt his heart race when he saw the small, dirty figure spying on his activities. His fraudulent dealings with public lands could not be discovered by anyone, much less by a child who could tell what she saw to anyone. Panic took over his rational thoughts. "You!" he shouted, dropping the shovel and running towards the tree. "What are you doing here?" Izzy tried to run, but her legs, weakened by malnutrition, couldn't carry her very far. Richard caught up with her in a few seconds, grabbing her thin arm with excessive force. The girl began to cry, trying to break free, but the man was much stronger. "Did you see anything?" he asked, shaking the child violently. "Answer me." "I just wanted some food," Izzy sobbed, not understanding why this man was so angry. "Please, don't hurt me." Richard looked at the dirty and ragged girl, quickly calculating his options. She was just a street child. No one would miss her. And she had seen everything: the burial of the documents, his despair, his exact location. He couldn't take the risk of letting her go. Without saying a word, he dragged Izzy through the back of the property, ignoring her screams of terror and pleas for mercy. In the most isolated corner of his land was an old well, abandoned for years and covered only by old boards. It was the perfect place to make an inconvenient witness disappear forever. With abrupt movements, Richard removed the boards covering the well. The hole was deep and dark, with a smell of mold and abandonment. Izzy understood his intentions and began to scream even louder, struggling desperately in the cruel man's arms. "No one will miss you anyway," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "It's better this way." And without hesitation, he threw the child into the dark hole, hearing her scream of terror echo through the damp walls. He quickly put the boards back over the opening, ignoring the muffled sobs coming from below. Richard returned home, trying to convince himself that he had done what was necessary to protect his secrets. Deep in the well, Izzy cried in the absolute darkness, hurt, scared, and completely alone. Night fell on Harmony Creek like a heavy blanket, bringing with it a damp cold that penetrated to the bones. At the bottom of the well, Izzy curled up in a corner, trembling violently. Her clothes were soaked from the humidity of the stone walls, and small wounds on her arms and legs burned like fire. The darkness was so complete that she couldn't even see her own hands. The girl cried softly, calling for her grandmother between broken sobs. "Grandma Betty, help me," she whispered into the void, waiting in vain for an answer that would never come. The echo of her own voice scared her even more, making her curl up even further in the damp corner. Drops of water fell constantly from the ceiling of the well, creating a rhythmic sound that seemed to mark every second of her despair. The hours dragged on like eternity. Izzy tried to sleep, but the cold and fear would not allow it. Her stomach hurt even more now, the hunger mixing with nausea and dizziness. She tried a few times to get up and touch the walls of the well, looking for some way out. But the stones were smooth and too high for her weak little arms to reach any support. It was during the early hours of the morning that she heard a different sound, light footsteps on the surface, right above her head. Izzy looked up, even knowing that she couldn't see anything in the darkness, and sharpened her ears. The footsteps stopped exactly over the well, as if someone was standing there listening. A low, soft whinny echoed through the night. It was a gentle sound, different from the screams and threats she had heard hours before. Izzy felt something strange in her chest, a small spark of hope that she didn't even know still existed. Gathering all the strength she had left, she cried out for help. "Help! Someone help me! I'm down here!" The whinny came again, this time louder and more persistent. It was as if the animal was responding to her call. Izzy began to scream even louder, alternating pleas for help with desperate crying. With each cry, the horse responded with sounds that seemed to carry a strange understanding. Star, an 8-year-old white horse that belonged to the neighboring farm, had escaped from his pasture during the afternoon. The animal, known for its gentle nature and sharp instincts, wandered through the region when he witnessed the whole horrible scene. Hidden among the trees, he saw Richard throwing the child into the well and covering the opening. Something deep and primitive awakened in the animal's chest, a protective impulse that he couldn't ignore. Throughout the night, Star stayed near the well, walking in circles and whinnying softly, as if trying to convey comfort to the child down there. Whenever Izzy screamed, he responded, creating a strange conversation between two suffering souls. As the hours passed, Izzy's situation deteriorated rapidly. The humidity and cold began to cause uncontrollable tremors in her small body. Her lips turned purple, and a dry cough began to tear her throat. The dehydration, added to the trauma and panic, made her head throb with terrible pain. "I can't take it anymore," she murmured, her voice almost fading. "I want to get out of here." Star seemed to feel the girl's growing despair. His whinnies became louder and more insistent, echoing through the silent property. The sound carried an urgency that began to bother the neighbors on the farm next door. Hank Miller, 45 years old, woke up before dawn with the constant noise. He was a hard-working man, owner of a small rural property where he raised some cattle and planted corn. Married to Carol for 20 years, he was known in the region for his honesty and kind heart, characteristics that had become rare in the local community. "Carol," he whispered, nudging his wife. "Do you hear that noise? There's a horse whinnying non-stop in the back of Richard's property." Carol Miller, 42 years old, a woman of deep faith and hands always willing to help, was also restless. "Something must have happened to some animal. That whinnying isn't normal, Hank." The couple got up and went out into the yard, trying to locate the origin of the sound. Richard's property was separated from theirs only by a wire fence, and they could clearly see the silhouette of the white horse walking in circles in a specific area of the back. "That horse isn't Richard's," Hank observed, frowning. "Looks lost, and look how agitated he is." They watched for a few minutes, noting the animal's strange behavior. Star did not stop walking around the same point, whinnying and pawing the ground, as if trying to call attention to something specific. "I'm going to take a look," Hank decided, putting on his boots. "Maybe the animal is hurt or has some problem." Carol held her husband's arm. "Be careful. You know how arrogant Richard is. He doesn't like anyone entering his property." "It's just to check if the horse is okay. I'm not going to get into trouble." Hank jumped the low fence and cautiously approached the place where Star continued his desperate dance. As he got closer, he could hear something that made his blood run cold. A weak, childish voice coming from under the ground. "Help! Someone get me out of here!" The man ran to the exact spot where the horse indicated and discovered the poorly placed boards over the old well. Without hesitation, he removed them and shouted down, "Is there anyone there? Can you answer me?" Izzy's voice, already hoarse and weak, reached him like a ghostly whisper. "Help me, please. I can't take it anymore." Hank felt a lump in his throat when he realized it was a child. "Calm down, little one. I'm going to get you out of there right now." He shouted to Carol, "Carol, bring the rope and call Billy. There's a child trapped in the well." Billy Miller, the couple's 18-year-old son, ran to help his father as soon as he heard the screams. He was a strong young man, accustomed to the heavy work of the farm. Together, the two men improvised a rescue system using ropes and an old basket. The operation was slow and delicate. Izzy was so weak that she could barely hold on to the rope. Her small hands slipped and she felt dizzy, making her sway dangerously. But finally, after several agonizing minutes, she was pulled out of the hellish hole. When Carol saw the state of the girl, tears sprang to her eyes. Izzy was unrecognizable, skin pale as paper, lips purple, clothes soaked and torn, wounds all over her small body. But what shocked them most was the child's gaze, empty, lost, as if part of her soul had been trapped at the bottom of that well. "My God," Carol murmured, wrapping Izzy in her shawl. "Who did this to you, child?" Izzy couldn't speak. Her lips trembled, but no sound came out. The trauma had temporarily stolen her voice, leaving her trapped in a terrified silence. Star approached delicately and sniffed the girl, as if checking if she was really safe. "We're going to take her home," Hank decided, picking up the child in his arms. She needs urgent medical attention." As they walked back to the miller's house, none of them noticed the dark figure watching everything from the window of the big house. Richard had woken up with the screams and watched, with growing horror, his plans collapsing. The girl was alive, and now she was being taken care of by neighbors who would certainly ask inconvenient questions. For the first time in many years, Richard Huntington felt real fear. The miller's house was simple but cozy, with exposed brick walls and wooden furniture worn by time. In the guest room, Izzy lay on the iron bed, lined with clean sheets that smelled of homemade soap. Carol had spent the whole night by her side, changing cold compresses on the girl's forehead and trying to get her to drink small sips of lukewarm water with sugar. The fever had started in the hours after the rescue. Izzy's small body was burning up, and she was delirious, muttering disconnected words about dark holes and bad men. Her brown eyes, when they opened, didn't seem to recognize where she was, scanning the room with terror, as if she were still trapped in the well. "Easy, honey," Carol whispered, dabbing a damp cloth on the child's sweaty face. "You're safe now. No one's going to hurt you anymore." But Izzy couldn't believe it. Whenever someone approached too quickly, she shrank against the wall, trembling violently. The trauma had created an invisible barrier around her, preventing her from trusting any human being. Her nights were tormented by nightmares, where she heard Richard's cruel voice and felt again the sensation of falling into the dark void. It was on the third day that something extraordinary happened. Carol was in the kitchen making chicken soup when she heard a soft whinny coming from the yard. Looking out the window, she saw Star standing near the fence, his neck stretched towards the house, as if he knew exactly where Izzy was. "Hank," she called, intrigued. "That horse is back." "He's just standing there, looking this way." The man went out to investigate and was surprised by the animal's behavior. Star showed no signs of aggression or fear. On the contrary, there was something almost human in his dark eyes, a genuine concern that touched Hank's heart. "Looks like he wants to see how the girl is," he murmured, cautiously approaching the fence. Star allowed Hank to approach and even touch him, but his eyes remained fixed on the direction of the room where Izzy was resting. It was as if the horse could feel the child's suffering through the walls of the house. That same afternoon, when Izzy woke up from another restless sleep, Carol had an idea. "Sweetheart, there's someone out here who wants to see you. Would you like to meet the horse that helped you?" For a brief moment, something changed in Izzy's empty gaze. A small curiosity awoke behind the fear, and she nodded slightly. Carol carried her to the window, wrapped in a woolen blanket, and pointed to the yard. When Izzy saw Star, her tears began to flow silently. They were not tears of pain, but of recognition. She remembered the soft whinnies that had been her only company during that terrible night. Somehow, she knew that this animal had stayed by her side when she needed it most. "He stayed all night near you," Carol explained gently. "It was because of him that we were able to find you." Izzy stretched out a small hand towards the window, as if she wanted to touch the horse. Star, as if he had sensed her gesture, approached even closer to the fence and emitted a low and comforting whinny. In the days that followed, a peculiar routine was established. Every morning, Star appeared near the miller's house and remained there for hours, always attentive to the movements in Izzy's room. The family began to leave the window open so that the girl could see him, and this small connection became the first step in her slow recovery. Izzy's physical recovery was even more worrying than her emotional one. Prolonged malnutrition had left her body extremely fragile. She could barely stand for more than a few minutes, and her legs trembled with any effort. Carol prepared nutritious broths and sweet porridges, but the girl ate very little, always suspicious of the food, as if she feared it might be poisoned. It was Billy who had the idea to bring Star closer to the house. "Mom, what if we let the horse into the yard? Maybe the girl would feel safer." Carol hesitated initially, worried about safety, but seeing Izzy's emotional state, she decided to try. When they opened the gate, Star entered calmly and positioned himself under the window of the room, as if he knew exactly where he should be. The change in Izzy was immediate. For the first time since the rescue, she managed to eat a whole bowl of soup, always looking out the window to make sure that Star was still there. At night, when nightmares attacked her, it was enough to hear the soft sound of the horses breathing outside to calm down a little. As the weeks passed, Izzy began to show signs of improvement. She could stand for longer periods and even take a few wobbly steps around the room. But her true recovery began when, on a sunny October afternoon, she asked to go out and meet Star up close. Carol carried her to the yard and sat her down in a wicker chair close to the horse. Izzy was still very weak, but her eyes sparkled for the first time in weeks when Star approached delicately and sniffed her small hand. The soft touch of the animal's muzzle against her skin made her flash something that looked like a smile. "He likes you," Carol observed, touched to see the girl's first positive reaction. Izzy still couldn't speak. The trauma had temporarily stolen her voice, but she began to make small gestures with her hands, trying to communicate with Star. The horse seemed to understand every movement, responding with soft whinnies and gentle movements of his head. This special connection strengthened quickly. Izzy began to spend the afternoons in the yard, always closely accompanied by Carol, interacting silently with Star. The horse seemed to have an extraordinary protective instinct, always positioning himself between the girl and anyone who approached too quickly. It was during one of these afternoons that Richard Huntington appeared. Wearing his expensive suit and with a false expression of concern, he approached the fence that separated the two properties. "Mrs. Miller," he called, tipping his hat in an exaggerated display of courtesy. "I came to see how the girl is doing. What a terrible situation, isn't it?" Carol felt a chill seeing the man. There was something in his eyes that didn't match his apparently kind words. Instinctively, she placed herself between Richard and Izzy, who had hidden behind Star the moment she heard the male voice. "She's recovering," Carol replied dryly. "Thank you for your concern." "It's a shame that such a small child has gone through this," Richard continued, his eyes fixed on Izzy. "Do you have any idea how she ended up in that well? Very strange, don't you think?" The question sounded more like a veiled threat. Carol noticed how Izzy had begun to tremble violently upon hearing the man's voice, and how Star positioned himself even more protectively, with his ears pricked and muscles tense. "We don't know anything," Carol lied. "The girl still can't talk about what happened." "Oh, what a pity," Richard said, but there was a poorly disguised relief in his voice. "Well, if you need anything, you can count on me. I have resources, connections. I can even help find a suitable place for the child. An orphanage in Denver, maybe, far from here, where she can forget this terrible trauma." The suggestion made Carol's blood boil. "Very kind of you, Mr. Huntington, but it won't be necessary. Izzy is fine here with us." Richard's eyes hardened for an instant, revealing his true nature, before returning to the mask of false kindness. Of course. I'm just thinking of the child's well-being. But you should consider that raising a traumatized child like that can be complicated and expensive." After that first visit, Richard began to appear frequently, always with new offers of help that sounded more like veiled threats. He offered money for them to send Izzy away, suggested distant orphanages, talked about the costs of raising a sick child. The constant pressure began to affect the entire Miller family, but especially Carol, who saw how Izzy regressed in her recovery after each visit from Richard. The girl began to have more frequent nightmares and refused to leave the yard, always close to Star, as if the horse were her only protection in the world. October arrived in Harmony Creek, bringing with it a stifling heat and a devastating drought that had not been seen for decades. The relentless sun burned the red earth, turning the verdant pastures into dry and yellowish fields. The streams that crossed the region diminished drastically, and many springs simply dried up, leaving only craters of cracked mud in the place where crystal-clear water once flowed. On the miller's farm, the situation became more desperate with each passing day. Hank walked through the dry pastures, watching his few head of cattle competing for the last strands of dead grass. The corn crops, which represented the family's main source of income, had completely withered, leaving only dry stalks that crackled in the wind. "Carol, I don't know what to do anymore," he confessed to his wife one hot October night, as he watched Izzy sleep restlessly in the next room. "If it doesn't rain soon, we're going to lose everything. And we still have the girl to take care of." Carol, who had visibly lost weight in recent weeks due to the stress and sleepless nights taking care of Izzy, held her husband's hand firmly. "We'll find a way, Hank. We always do." But hope became increasingly difficult to maintain. The property's well, which had never dried up in 20 years of marriage, now produced only a trickle of muddy water that barely met the family's basic needs. They had to ration every drop, and Carol found herself forced to choose between giving Izzy a bath or washing the girl's dirty clothes. It was in this period of extreme difficulty that Richard Huntington intensified his cruel campaign. Using his political influence as a member of the city council and his friendship with the mayor, he managed to have the water supply by tanker truck cut off to the smaller properties in the region, including the millers. "It's a matter of priority," explained the City Hall employee when Hank went to the city to protest. "We have to serve the larger properties first, which generate more jobs and taxes for the municipality." Hank knew that this was a lie. Richard's ranch had its own artesian wells and irrigation system. It didn't need water from the city, but he had no way to prove it, and his word as a small farmer was worth nothing against the influence of the most powerful man in the region. The situation became even more serious when Carol began to show symptoms of extreme exhaustion. The constant stress, added to the dehydration and lack of adequate sleep, caused her to faint one morning while trying to give Izzy a bath. Billy found her lying on the bathroom floor, pale and with weak breathing. "Mom can't keep going on like this," Billy said to his father after helping Carol lie down. "She's killing herself, taking care of the girl and worrying about our situation." Hank looked at Izzy, who was watching everything with her big, frightened eyes. The girl had progressed slowly in her recovery. She could already walk short distances and even whisper a few words, but she still depended completely on Carol's care. Seeing her so fragile and Carol deteriorating because of her created a painful dilemma in the kind man's heart. It was during this crisis that something extraordinary happened. Izzy, despite her young age and fragility, began to demonstrate a surprising intuition for finding water. The first time she was playing quietly in the yard with Star when she suddenly stopped and pointed to a specific corner of the property. "Water," she murmured, the first clear word she had spoken since the rescue. "There's water there." Billy, who was repairing a nearby fence, heard the girl and approached curiously. Following the direction she was pointing, he began to dig in the indicated place. To his surprise, after only 3 feet of depth, he found a small but clean spring which had been covered by dirt and dry leaves. "Dad, come see this!" Billy shouted, excited. "The girl found water!" Hank ran to the spot and couldn't believe what he was seeing. The small spring was not abundant, but it provided enough clean water for the family's basic needs. It was as if Izzy had a special gift, a connection with the earth that they couldn't explain. In the following days, Izzy repeated the feat 2 more times, always closely accompanied by Star. It seemed that the horse also sensed where there was underground water, and together they guided the family to small sources hidden on the property. This inexplicable ability became the miller's salvation during the most difficult months of the drought. But Richard was not willing to give up his plans. Realizing that his strategy of depriving the family of water was not working, he decided to resort to more direct methods. One night, he hired 2 men from town to break into the miller's property and talk to Hank about Izzy's situation. The men arrived after midnight, when the whole family was asleep. They didn't count, however, on Star's sharp instincts. The horse, who had developed the habit of sleeping close to the house to protect Izzy, noticed the presence of the intruders even before they reached the gate. Star began to whinny loudly and paw the ground, creating a noise that woke up the whole family. Izzy, who had developed an almost telepathic connection with the animal, woke up immediately and ran to the window. Her eyes, accustomed to the darkness, managed to see the shadowy figures approaching the house. "Bad men," she whispered, running to Hank and Carol's room. "Star is warning us. Bad men coming." Hank grabbed his hunting rifle and positioned himself at the front window, while Billy did the same thing at the back of the house. The 2 intruders, realizing that they had lost the element of surprise, decided to retreat, but not before leaving a threatening message shouted from the road. "You better think carefully about this girl. It's not good for you to be meddling in matters that don't concern you." That night marked a fundamental change in the family's dynamics. Everyone realized that Izzy and Star had developed a system of mutual protection that went beyond normal human understanding. The girl seemed able to understand the signs that the horse sent her, and he responded to her fears and needs in an almost supernatural. In the days following the incident, Izzy became even closer to Star. She spent hours talking quietly with the animal, telling him her fears and nightmares. Although she still couldn't talk about what had happened in the well with the adults, with Star, she seemed to find the comfort necessary to process her trauma. The family's financial situation remained desperate. Without the corn crop and with the cattle dwindling due to lack of adequate pasture, Hank found himself forced to sell some of his few possessions to buy food and medicine for Carol, who couldn't fully recover from her exhaustion. It was in this moment of greatest vulnerability that Richard appeared with his most tempting proposal yet. He arrived one afternoon wearing his best suit, driving his imported car, and carrying a suitcase full of money. "Hank, my friend," he said, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "I came here as a neighbor and a Christian to offer a solution to all our problems. I know you're going through hard times, and I have a proposal that can help everyone." He opened the suitcase, revealing more money than the Miller family had seen in their entire lives. "This money is for you, enough to pay off all debts, renovate the house, buy new cattle, plant again. Everything you need to start over." Hank looked at the money with wide eyes, but his voice trembled when he asked, "And what do you want in return?" "Very simple," Richard replied, still smiling. "I want you to send the girl to an orphanage I know in Seattle. It's an excellent place, with quality education, appropriate medical care. She'll be much better there than here, causing problems for a family that already has so many difficulties." The silence that followed was broken by a loud and agitated whinny from Star. As if he had understood the proposal, the horse positioned himself near the window, where Izzy was observing the scene, clearly disturbed by the return of the man who haunted her nightmares. Hank looked at the money, then at his sick wife, at his worried son, and finally at the frightened girl in the window. The temptation was enormous, but when he saw the silent tears running down Izzy's face, his decision became clear. "You can take your money back, Richard," he said with a firm voice. "The girl stays with us." The smile disappeared from Richard's face, replaced by an expression of cold fury. "You'll regret this decision," he threatened, closing the suitcase violently. "You'll see what happens to those who don't accept my generosity." Winter arrived earlier and more severe than normal in Harmony Creek. The freezing nights of June contrasted brutally with the stifling heat of the previous drought, creating a hostile climate that seemed to reflect the state of mind of the region. In the small Miller house, the family squeezed around the wood stove, trying to keep warm while facing the worst crisis of their lives. Izzy had turned 5 in May, but her body remained as fragile as that of a much smaller child. Prolonged malnutrition and emotional trauma had slowed her development, leaving her too small for her age. In that cruel winter, she developed a persistent cough that worried Carol deeply, who had not yet fully recovered from her own exhaustion. The nights were the worst. Izzy woke up several times, sweaty and trembling, crying out for help in recurring nightmares where she saw herself again at the bottom of the dark well. Only the constant presence of Star, whom Hank had allowed to sleep on the porch of the house during the winter, managed to calm her down. The sound of the horse's peaceful breathing became the only remedy capable of making Izzy go back to sleep. Richard Huntington intensified his cruel persecution during those cold months. His last threat had not been in vain. He really began to make the Millers' lives a calculated hell. First, he pressured the local bank to accelerate the collection of the family's debts, creating impossible deadlines to meet. Then, he used his influence to get suppliers to refuse to sell seeds and feed to the neighbor's property. "I can't sell to you anymore," explained the owner of the agricultural supply store, a man who had known Hank for decades, embarrassed. "Richard Huntington said that anyone who does business with you doesn't do business with him anymore, and he's responsible for half of my sales." The situation deteriorated further when Carol fainted again, this time during a coughing fit from Izzy. Billy found her lying on the floor of the room, with the girl kneeling next to her, trying to wake her up with her small hands. It was the first time that Izzy had shown initiative to help someone since the trauma, but seeing Carol faint terrified her deeply. "Aunt Carol, wake up!" cried Izzy, gently shaking the woman's face. "Please don't go away like Grandma." When Carol finally woke up, she found Izzy clinging to her neck, trembling with fear and cold. "I thought you were going to leave forever," whispered the girl, her first complete words directed at an adult since the rescue. Dr. Evans, the only doctor in town, came to examine Carol and gave a grim diagnosis. "She has severe anemia and signs of deep depression. Her body can't take this level of stress anymore. She needs absolute rest, adequate food, and medications that cost more than you can afford." Hank felt the world collapsing on his shoulders. How could he provide rest and adequate food for Carol when they barely had money to buy the basics? How could he protect Izzy and his family from Richard's relentless persecution? It was during one of those nights of despair that Izzy did something extraordinary. On a particularly cold dawn, she woke up without screaming or crying, but with a strange determination in her eyes. She put on the little boots that Carol had knitted for her and went silently to the yard where Star was dozing near the door. "Star," she whispered, gently touching the horse's neck. "We have to help Aunt Carol. She's sick because of us." The horse opened his eyes and looked at her with that almost human expression that had become familiar. As if he understood perfectly what she was saying, Star stood up and positioned himself next to the girl, ready to follow wherever she went. Together, they left the property through the opening in the fence and began a nocturnal journey through the region. Izzy seemed guided by an instinct that she herself did not understand, walking safely even in the darkness, always with Star protecting her flanks. They crossed fields and small dirt roads, stopping occasionally for the girl to touch the ground and close her eyes, as if she were hearing something that only she could perceive. After 2 hours of walking, they arrived at an area of Richard's ranch that Izzy recognized immediately. It was the place where she had seen the man burying the plastic bags months before. But now, with her vision sharpened by trauma and necessity, she could see details that she had missed the first time. Izzy knelt near the burial site and began to draw on the frozen ground with a stick. Her drawings were surprisingly accurate, detailed maps of the property, with exact markings of where Richard had hidden different groups of documents. It was as if her traumatized mind had recorded every detail of that terrible scene with photographic clarity. Star remained vigilant throughout the process, his ears always alert for any sign of danger. When Izzy finished her drawings, They returned home in the same silent way, arriving shortly before dawn. The next morning, when Hank discovered the drawings that Izzy had left on the kitchen table, he initially didn't understand their meaning. They were childish scribbles, he thought, attempts by the girl to express her traumas through art. But as he studied the details, he began to realize the impressive precision of the maps. "Billy, come see this," he called, intrigued. "What do you think these drawings from Izzy are?" Billy examined the papers carefully and was equally surprised. "Dad, this looks like a map of Richard's ranch. Look, here's his house, the barn, and these marked X's. Could she be trying to show us something?" When they questioned Izzy about the drawings, she simply said, "Bad things hidden in the ground. Richard hid bad things." Hank felt a chill run down his spine. If the girl had really witnessed Richard burying something compromising, that would explain the relentless persecution they suffered. But how could he use this information without putting his family in even greater danger? The answer came from an unexpected source. Dr. Evans, during one of the visits to check on Carol's condition, noticed the drawings on the table and became curious. As a cultured man and former lawyer before becoming a doctor, he immediately realized the potential importance of those maps. "Hank," he said in a low voice, "you know that for months there have been rumors circulating about irregularities in the acquisition of land by some farmers in the region. There are investigators from Denver asking discreet questions at City Hall." Hank's eyes lit up with a spark of hope. "Do you think these drawings from Izzy could be of interest to those investigators? I think we should contact them discreetly. If there really is something buried on Richard's property, they have the resources and authority to investigate properly." While the adults discussed the implications of the drawings, Izzy developed a secret routine with Star. Every dawn, when the family was asleep, they went out to watch the movements on Richard's ranch. The girl had become a silent observer, mentally recording every suspicious detail, every fragmented conversation that she could capture from the wind. It was during one of these vigils that she witnessed something that terrified her deeply. Richard was talking to two strange men near the place where he used to bury documents, and their voices carried a dangerous urgency. "I need you to solve the problem of that girl once and for all," Richard was saying. "She represents a threat that I can no longer ignore." "And the family?" asked one of the men. "Do whatever is necessary to get them to stop meddling in my business. If they don't want to accept my generous offers, they'll have to accept the consequences." Izzy felt the same paralyzing terror that she had experienced on the day she was thrown into the well. Star perceived her fear and guided her silently back home, but both knew that the danger had escalated to a completely new level. The next morning, Izzy did something that surprised the whole family. For the first time since the trauma, she actively sought to talk to Hank, pulling him by the hand to a corner of the house where they could talk in privacy. "Uncle Hank," she said, her voice small but determined. "Bad men are going to hurt our family. Richard sent them. We have to tell good people about the things hidden in the ground." Hank knelt down to be at the girl's height and held her cold little hands. "Are you sure of what you heard, little one?" Izzy nodded, her tears beginning to flow. "He's very bad, Uncle. He threw me in the dark hole, and now he wants to hurt you too." It was the first time that Izzy spoke openly about what had happened on the day of her kidnapping. Hank hugged her tightly, feeling a mixture of anger and determination grow in his chest. No matter how powerful Richard was, no one would threaten his family with impunity. That afternoon, Dr. Evans made discreet contact with the prosecutors from Denver, and for the first time in months, a light of hope began to shine on the dark horizon of the Miller family. February of 2024 brought unexpected changes to Harmony Creek. A team of prosecutors from Denver arrived discreetly in the city, conducting investigations into land irregularities that had been reported anonymously. Dr. Evans had sent copies of Izzy's drawings, along with a detailed account of the situation, and the investigators were intrigued by the accuracy of the maps made by a 5-year-old child. Prosecutor Jake Callahan, an experienced 48-year-old man specializing in crimes against public property, studied Izzy's drawings in his hotel room. "These maps are too detailed to be a coincidence," he murmured to his assistant. "If this child really witnessed the burial of documents, we may be facing a significant case of land fraud." Meanwhile, at the miller's house, the tension had reached unbearable levels. Richard had intensified his threats, and now strange men were circulating around the property during the dawns, leaving intimidating messages. One morning, Hank found his tools broken and scattered around the yard, with a note attached: "Last chance to get rid of the girl." Carol had lost even more weight and spent most of her time in bed, consumed by worry and fear. Billy had taken over most of the work on the farm, but the constant pressure was taking its toll too. The family was on the verge of total collapse. It was during one of those tense nights that Izzy made a decision that would change everything. She had observed Richard for weeks, always accompanied by Star, and noticed a pattern in his movements. The man regularly visited the places where he had buried documents, always alone, always nervous, as if checking if his secrets were still safe. "Star," she whispered to the horse one cold dawn, "we have to help the good people find the bad things he hid. Only we know where they are." The horse whinnied low, as if he understood the gravity of the situation. Together, they left the property and headed to Richard's ranch, but this time with a different purpose. Izzy was carrying a small piece of white cloth, part of an old sheet, which she tied to a tree near the first place where she had seen the burial of documents. During the next 2 nights, she repeated the process, discreetly marking all the places she had memorized. They were small signs, almost invisible to anyone who didn't know what to look for, but sufficient.